Hi, today we're here with Johanna Faries, General Manager of Call of Duty, overseeing the entire Call of Duty franchise. She's also the Senior Vice President, Head of Leagues at Activision Blizzard. Johanna also spent more than 11 years at the National Football League, eventually serving as Vice President of Club Business Development. How are you doing today, Johanna?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for taking the time with us today. Can you share a little about your story? How did you join Activision Blizzard?
I joined because Activision Blizzard was really interested in winning in esports and taking pages from the NFL and NBA and other major sports leagues playbooks to apply that to their gaming IP. And so what that really meant is, how do we start to take esports, Call of Duty specifically, Overwatch specifically, major games in the Activision Blizzard portfolio, and not only amplify the competitive aspects of those communities, which have been on the radar within gaming for many years now, but really level up how mainstream sports culture and mainstream media can adopt and embrace these as really premier sports and entertainment products, experiences, events. And they wanted the know-how, I think, from folks like me who came from those traditional sports leagues to say, this is what that looks like. Here are the formulas that work. Here's how we generate revenue, both at the league level and at the club or team level in the NFL. Here's what media rights means to the business. Here's what licensing means. Here's how you think about sponsorships, but also here's how you think about regulation, right? How do you actually create governance that's centralized such that you can take what has typically been and historically been grassroots led and community driven to become really formalized and monitored, managed, scaled at a best in class level. And so I made the jump because it was really compelling to me. And I liked the high risk, high reward opportunity to try something really, really new from scratch.
That's a great strategy of taking somebody that's in a very pivotal role from another industry, bringing a lot of the learnings over and evolving the business model.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the vision that 𝐒𝐨𝐴𝐺𝐻 and other leaders at Activision had to say, look, we don't know what we don't know. We know what the aspiration could be. We know what the scale of this could be when you just run the numbers. And I ran the numbers, right? Just about how many people are a part of the Call of Duty universe, for example, to be able to think about how we take the competitive side of that brand to new heights was just an astronomical opportunity, and not without its challenges, right? But it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for a sports executive to be able to take a white sheet of paper, as I often talk about, and ask these big questions, fundamental questions about what kind of ecosystem we want to create, what kind of rules we want to set, and let's apply what we know works in other spaces, but also really marry that up with the magic that is pretty singular to brands like Call of Duty and the way we can push on innovation and digital experiences and digital monetization too. So really cool, really unique and ambitious, which I found really attractive at the time.
Which industry is more fun?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Man, it depends on who you are and what makes you tick. Because I had a dream job in my estimation when I was 12 years in at the NFL. Didn't think I would do anything else, honestly. Just thought, this is it. We're happy, we're great, we're supported, we're doing the most amazing stuff at the biggest league on the planet. And then I come over here and it's been so rewarding, so mind bending. It's more global in its remit here in gaming. It's more innovation led, tech led, right? And the mix of left brain, right brain opportunity, I think, fits more with who I am individually, at least at that moment in my professional career, to say, yeah, I've learned so much from the big behemoth of the NFL, but to be able to, again, sort of put my thumbprints on something completely new and have that sense of authorship and co-authorship and do it at a global level in so many different countries, different dynamics and communities across the world was really unique and different. And so I love them both in different ways.
Yeah, you got sounds like you met your match. You like challenges and you
I
found it in
do,
both organizations.
for better and for worse. Yes.
Well, let's get into it. What are your top three principles that attributed to your success?
So I tried to keep them short and sweet, but there's a lot packed into each, at least how they've informed my own journey. The first one being what I called micro listening. And what I mean by micro listening is this real intentional ability to listen for cues, both obvious and maybe unsaid, or you have to peel back layers of an onion to really hear more than just what's being expressed out loud, right? We see this in so many different spaces, but I feel like this muscle of hyper listening has had such amazing influence in my own life. Just to read a room, especially in the corporate world, there's often historically been a bias towards the loudest person in the room or the person who's presenting. But you can get a lot when you're really listening to who else taking in the information. Why are these people here? What's the energy in the room? Who's asking the questions? Who seems to have the clout, even if they're not presenting? There's just so much that I think can be picked up on that really tells you a lot more about the context of a conversation, but maybe even more so the context of an organization and how decisions get made and who the players are, so to speak, when you're really microscopic in your ability to listen. I think the other piece is even individually, right? Like I'm a yoga fanatic, for example, and so much of the practice is about every day you're just trying to find a new, way that you are responding to a pose. That's really all that the practice is asking of you. But it's this whole sense of intentional listening, like, where am I today? Am I feeling good? Am I feeling strong? Am I feeling tired? What's different today than the last time I did the practice? And what I've really gleaned from that is this just ability to really check in with myself. And it allows me to have a mindfulness that I can, I think, bring into my work life because I'm more, again, sensitive to the energies happening internally and maybe some of the things that I need to work on. And so I just am a huge believer in the ability to listen. Lastly, I'd say that has been such a part of the recipe for how we've operated leagues, whether it was at the NFL, whether it was here at 𝐂𝐤𝐭𝐡, and certainly now in the role of GM for Call of Duty. Everything is about listening to our community. Everything we do is community driven, community informed. And you'll know right away if you're really actioned on listening, whether you've taken a good turn or a bad turn. And it's really not about expecting to win with your community each and every day, especially as big as these communities are. You're not going to please everybody. But to the extent that you can really glean the information about how your brand is playing in culture, how new to franchise players are interacting with your brand, how people who've been with the brand for 17 years think about the brand, and everything in between, it really has helped inform our decision about what kind of content do we make, what kind of risks do we take, what's noise, and what is really helpful feedback that we need to take a time out and really reassess if we've taken a left turn when most of our community maybe wanted us to take a right. And so it's played out paying dividends in terms of how we've made our decisions as a business and as a brand. And it's really important that we continue to do that.
It's interesting how you explain micro listening on so many multiple fronts at once. But we're going to unpack it. I know you have some other principles, but this we have fun is to take these apart and turn them into some practical how-tos. How would you turn it into a practice?
Well, again, I kind of go back to I guess because I start my day each and every day on the yoga mat or take a walk outside. I mean, go ahead.
You're onto something because it is, you have to build a practice out of it ultimately, because then you'll do it. Go ahead. I like where you're going with it.
Yeah, it is. I think there's oftentimes this sort of nature versus nurture or things that are innate to leaders or people who are successful. But what gets lost is most skills, at least that I've seen in business, are tradable. And it's really a question about focus and how often do you harness the ability to build a skill. And you can really build a skill around being a great listener. So that has helped, right? Some sort of mindfulness practice, and I know that gets used in all these cliche ways. So I don't really care as much about the specifics, but some sort of silent moment to check in and work on self, I think is really important. And then, again, I think some of the biggest lessons that I learned from great mentors when I was coming up the ranks early on in my career were really about reading a room, really about absorbing the mannerisms or dynamics in group settings.
How do you,
And
I mean,
not,
I feel like
yeah,
it's
go ahead.
almost like a peripheral, like you just kind of are very aware about the surroundings. You mentioned it earlier. You're wanting to understand why people are there.
Mm-hmm.
And these things, I mean, that doesn't come natural to people. And I think
Mm-hmm.
one is that do you consciously bring it to consciousness and saying, hey, I'm actively trying to notice the details, which maybe is something till you build it to a behavior or pattern for yourself. But how would you do that? How would you get to that point where you're getting there, where you're taking that approach and in that situation and you're activating yourself to be very noticing of everything?
Yeah, I think there's just such power in trying to be the sponge. Let's say, even if it's your first 100 days, we always talk about this, right? As leaders, like my first 90 days, my first 100 days, like that's the best time I find to give yourself permission to be like, I am not going to be the one to go out on a limb. I need to learn, like just learn, get to know everybody, observe. And I think if you do tell yourself, okay, I'm getting invited to all these meetings, whether you're 22 or you're 42, it doesn't matter. I'm getting invited to this meeting. And first ask yourself, like, it's asked to introduce myself, but beyond that, I'm going to sit here and start to ask very like high level questions. Who's in the room? How long have they been at the company? What division do they work for? Who runs their division? Who's their boss's boss? Are they revenue driving? Are they an expense, account for the company? Who's talking? Who's sitting, and seemingly not sort of engaged and they're on their phone? Who's asking all the questions? There's just so much you can do in that quiet period of observation. And you can leave the room not really having seemingly contributed. And yet you can use that and whatever you seem to have observed into your next, like, I think I'm going to go try and get 30 minutes to get to know that person who wasn't saying anything in the meeting, but I just want to understand, their story. There's just so much you can do, I think, in that observation mode that helps you build trusting relationships over time. Like there's such a bias in our culture to be an achievement culture or like win the meeting culture. Like I gotta show out and show up for this meeting and make sure that I say something really smart. It's like, you really don't need to do, you'll know when you need to do that. And it's probably 5 to 10 moments in a year where you really need to be sharp and you really need to have your content. Other than that, just be aware, be hyper present. There's so much you can glean from that.
You're framing the mindset where you're really focused on what's going on, really focused on asking good questions, learning. And I like the point around don't let yourself get in the way, where you do have all these thoughts in your head and you do want to make yourself look good. And that pops up, but you're consciously aware about it. You're putting it to the side and this is what's going to benefit is me understanding the situation, interacting with these people, understanding the problems that they're dealing with, getting aligned and how I can help them solve it. Yeah, you hear a really good way of putting that together. And that's the thing. I think that's like what it comes down to is remembering that. Put that away because it's a natural thing to think about and impress. Everybody wants to feel good about themselves or they get caught up in how am I going to present myself as a smart person? And they're always thinking about what's next to say when it's not. It's absolutely not. It's all about knowing what's going on. You're giving a greater gesture by spending the time and actually listening to the other person.
Yeah, back to your point, like this is something that you can learn and improve on as you grow, right? Because that's not my natural tendency. I'm certainly an introvert, but it's not my natural tendency not to like want to contribute verbally or, really weigh in. I'm probably presenting more often than not, but the more that I've been able to shape that skill, and again, it's thanks to great coaches and peers and mentors and reading a lot of books on leadership and listening to podcasts like yours, right? Like that you can learn these things. It has really, I think, enhanced and strengthened my ability as a leader because I remember when I was earlier on in my leadership chops and managing big teams, some of the feedback I would get was like, Johanna's awesome. I love working with her, but she, brings a lot of energy to a room and it could be intimidating. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know. Like, you don't even know, you don't know your blind spots. You don't know your tendencies, or you're going to write a certain script about it. And so it's really important to get that kind of feedback of like, ooh, maybe I need to just sometimes make myself small in a room and take a different route that is counter to how my natural tendencies may have skewed at a certain point in my life, and just see what more quiet can do, or leading with questions, or really nudging other people who haven't contributed to ask for their thought. And it has had transformational, I think, impact on my life to do that. And sort of play in both spaces, but you don't figure out how to play well in each space unless you're really starting to listen in a very mindful way.
Hey, now you're talking about strategic listening, where you're digging in and learning the things you want to learn and get that feedback, find your blind spots and
Yeah,
turn them
exactly.
into your strengths. Let's get into your next one. I think we covered and got some good angles on micro listening. But what's after that?
So I went to macro boundaries, I think is what I call them. And I said that because I was trying to figure out like what's the way to capture this notion of every one of us have principles or guiding values in our life that we also have to sort of mind for and engage with and become super self-aware of. And they change, by the way, depending on your life stage, but they're there. And I don't necessarily mean things that you're passionate about. I think sometimes values and passions get conflated. It's not the things that you're like excited about and you need to make room for. It's actually the things that you need as foundational fuel to be able to bring your best self to the party effectively, to be able to perform at your best because you're mentally well, you're spiritually well, you're physically well, whatever that might look like. And you probably have a set of values that like they're non-negotiables. They're things that if you did not have them, there's no job, there's no salary, there's no business card that's going to fulfill you deeply enough to make up for whatever those things, those trade-offs would have been. And that's sort of what I'm talking about macro boundaries, right?
So let me get this straight. They're like values, the things you don't compromise on.
I think so. Or they serve as, again, foundational values-based filters. So for example, my why is my family. I don't say that as like a judgment call on how people should value that. It means that there's literally no job offer in the world that I would take if it made my family life worse, as defined by me. So if I had to be on the road for 7 months, and I couldn't be with my husband and my kids, I would never take that job. If I had to move to a place that I felt like had bad schools for my kids, I just wouldn't take that job. I just wouldn't. It's a foundational boundary. I've now said, I'm going to say no when it hits that point of trade-off. There are other, boundaries. I remember when I was going on my first maternity leave, I was actually taking on my first vice president role at the NFL and managing a big team. And there's all kinds of stuff
No big deal.
no big deal, exactly. And there's all kinds of like mental gymnastics that go on for new moms, all the more so when they feel like they're being sort of sidelined while taking on big roles and all this stuff. But the long and short of that was, again, some of the best advice I got from mentors at the time was like, look, in 3 to 5 year increments, and it doesn't even have to be that long, but this is the time for you to be able to say to your team, here are my priorities for the next 18 months. It's my family as a new mom and this team, and making sure that you guys have the support you need from me as a leader. But that means that I'm going to have to leave earlier than usual to make the train, to get back, to pick up my newborn from daycare. Just what I'm going to do. And then I'll be back on at 8:30 p.m. And if you need me or you want to have a conversation or we need to chat, then that's when I'll sign back on. That was my boundary, and I think it set a certain normalization of it's okay if you need to leave before the clock strikes 5 at certain moments in time, because that's a boundary you've set. And I had fear going into it, but I had so much support because I was able to just be really clear on that.
Yeah, I think that's part of making it into a practical exercise is you're communicating it. You're being really transparent about it. How are you
And it's
doing?
not forever, right? It's not forever. It's a certain moment in time.
Right, right.
So that helps. But I think sometimes people don't harness the power of no. Again, intentionally being able to say, hey, you know what? Family dinner. I have male colleagues, their guiding boundary is family dinner. That's it. They're not giving that up. So don't call him at that time. Everybody knows that's the moment where he's shut down. He's not going to respond no matter the crisis of the day until family dinner is done and the kids are to bed, right? And that has nothing to do with me as a mom. That's that's a high-powered male executive who's drawn that line. There are a number of other lines, like I said, but I think being able to express it, as you said, own it, it actually becomes clarifying, not only for your own mental well-being, but for everybody else who works with you to respect, okay, that's her boundary, that's his boundary. And we do work around that, and that's okay.
About that model, is this something you had to reflect on and really write out what's really important? I'm just trying to get a sense if somebody's new to thinking that way, how would they approach it?
Well, I think you want to make sure that it's not 10 boundaries, right? Like you have to figure out, there's only a few, I would argue, and you have to really to search for that. I think I'm big on writing things out. Make the pros and cons list. Again, you don't have to have all of this innate in you. You don't have to know all the answers, but you can just say, okay, if I took this job and I had to live here at this compensation level, like what would that afford me? What's the work-life balance? Like, will I ever be able to hang out on the weekend? You just start asking these questions and you'll know right away what is a compromise you're willing to make and what isn't,
Yep.
So I think that's important, is writing things out and asking those deeper questions. And then over time, again, it becomes potentially part of your personal brand. So that when you have conversations with others who say, hey, we'd love for you to take this role or whatever, you don't have to remind people or reinvent a whole new set of guardrails. People know, oh, okay, she's about X, Y, and Z, or like, at least when we have this conversation, we have to respect the fact that Johanna cares a lot about her church community, for example. Like my husband and I are very involved with our spiritual family, and that's something that we need to have. It was absolutely part of the top 3, should we or shouldn't we guiding principles. So it's putting it in practice, and I think doing away with the fear that we often have about, I can't talk about that because they won't offer me the job, or I won't get promoted, or my career will slow down if I leave the office at 4:15 p.m. to catch the train for the next year and a half to pick up my son. Like that's what we tell ourselves. More often than not, it's not nearly as bad or as harmful as we may tell ourselves in our head. So have a little courage too, and have some peers who will advocate for that and advocate on your behalf for, hey, this is what she's about, or this is what he's about. And I think that's great. And I think that more people should be supported in those decisions. Like that really can help too.
Define your boundaries and own it.
Mm-hmm.
What's the third principle?
Meaningful contribution. So when I talk about meaningful contributions, I really think this is also a transformational like pivot and mindset. Some of it I've talked about in other forums, but it really draws on things that I learned in college and studied a bit of, but was a part of a lot of communities where it was about this principle of how do we as a team leave a place, a person, or a circumstance better than when we found it. And what that frame of mind enables is a couple of things, but I think primarily it gets out of, again, the consumption culture, the achievement culture of like, what is this role gonna do for me? What am I gonna get out of this meeting or this project? And so much of how I think we even talk about it on these discussions, these podcasts, these forums, it's like how to help somebody get to the next level, right? Like that's very much the culture we've shaped around leadership and career development. But that is a dangerous game, or I would actually say a less fulfilling game in my estimation than saying, how can you be a contributor? Find opportunities where you say, wow, I can have an impactful contribution on this company, this organization, on this team, on this person. And I'll be really proud of whatever that adventure holds for me. Yeah. And/or this job will enable me to have contribution, impact, or potential in other parts of my life because it affords me time on the weekends with my kids. I'm making this up. It affords me opportunities to be philanthropic. It allows me to do community service work on the side. It allows me to incubate a new passion project because they're a company that just gives people the space to explore other passions, whatever that might be. That to me has been so much more transformational and fulfilling as a mindset about what can I give to this space, not what can I take from it. So when I think about meaningful contribution, that's really what I mean, is finding opportunities to say, how can I leave the people who work for me in a better spot than when I came in the door, right? How can I make the Call of Duty player base and the community of people who care deeply about Call of Duty each and every day feel more excited, more heard, more wowed than they did a year ago or 2 years ago because of all the sweat equity that we're putting into it. Like you're going to end up in the same place, right? You still may glean individual rewards from that, but it's a pay it forward mindset that I really hope more of our society starts to embrace. It's like, how do you become a great contributor, not a great consumer of opportunity?
There's pay it forward and there's having this eye to look at where you can create value.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't. We're going through a bunch of hiring now and you get where people are really showing up to follow a process. And, I remember doing the career fair a couple of weeks ago and talking to a lot of undergrad kids. It's like, you should be on LinkedIn networking. Like this isn't the best way to find the right opportunity for you. You need to be thinking about the leadership and that network and how you're going to get shaped professionally around it.
Yep.
But that, I feel like there's a whole curve around just developing that view on looking at things instead of waiting to be told to follow a process or looking for that, but to
Mm.
actually say where every little thing is an opportunity to create value. Keeping the house clean and the stuff like that. It's like it
For
creates value
sure.
just doing things like that and all these increments around you. How do you do that? How do you shape somebody to have that really proactive thinking, looking around the whole world on
Mm.
where they can make everything better?
Well, I think that principle again is really helpful, right? Again, it's not because we're born that way necessarily, but to be able to just ask that question like, okay, how can
How
I
can I
create
help?
value, or what role can I play to leave this better than I found it is actually a great mechanic cognitively. But I'd also say there's this learning that I think as you get older, at least as I've had in the industry and wearing a lot of different hats, that the world is smaller than you'd think. And everything is about relationships. Everything is about the intangibles, the qualitative. Like, was she kind? Is probably going to be more remembered than any KPI I hit or didn't hit, right? And when you start to really have deeper appreciation for that, how many things come back around and how much it's about people in any industry, the care that you have for how you show up and how you treat each other, I think transcends the measurable work of our time. And so I think just always remember that, right? That I don't mean this in a go network and build good relationships, because again, that's about like, who can I meet? Who can give me a job? What can I get
Yeah,
from that?
yeah.
It's not that. It's what impression can I leave on people that feels rooted in authenticity and a real understanding that at the end of the day, everybody's just trying their best and everybody wants to have a sense of real value and have the space to express themselves in a way that feels fulfilling to them. And so if you can be helpful in that, they're going to remember that. So how can you be an agent to enable that? And I think even that question will just beget different behaviors over time.
Right. Just putting it out there too. How can I help? But you're right. It does come from just the way you approach things from the really beginning and trying to add value where you can and at least have that, even if you don't know, put it out there. What can I do to add value? That's
Yeah,
really
it's
good.
that servant leadership stuff, right? Like, again, it's not easy. I don't necessarily wake up naturally a servant leader, but I can remind myself like it's more important for me to ask what my team needs from me to do their best work. That's the best question I could be asking them,
You
right?
ever get it where like you forget sometimes? Like sometimes I forget to stop and tell someone how much I appreciate the effort and things like that. Because
Mm,
that's a form of the contribution is making sure I acknowledge the value of the hard
totally.
work. I feel like that sometimes it slips. I don't know. Like, how do you, I guess you got to have your own system, remind yourself, or that goes back to thinking about it.
You do. I think that's such a good push, right? Like these are these things that again don't always get measured, but they have enormous impact on trust building, team camaraderie, and retention. Actually, I found that some of the highest retained talent oftentimes are the ones that felt not just fulfilled in the work that they were doing and really appreciated for the work, right? And affirmed in it. So if you want to keep people around and you want to keep them engaged, especially the harder the job, it's also really important to pay it forward in those ways that don't cost you a dime, to just be like, hey, I know you're working on the candle from both ends. I just want to let you know I see it, other people see it. It's awesome. It's tremendous. What do you need from me? Can I order you some dinner? Can I take some of it off your plate? Like that alone says, wow, okay, this is a place that sees me and values me, and I feel safe here. And I at least recognize that the power of that.
You have to acknowledge when people are making meaningful contributions and really reciprocate and keep it going.
For sure.
What's the best mistake you've ever made?
Oh, geez, what a question. The best mistake I've ever made has got to be pursuing a very unsuccessful solo career in music,
Okay.
because I flew out of the nest. I had little money to my name. I pursued a passion and I learned more about resilience and perseverance and stretching and hey, it's going to be okay. Like the sun will shine tomorrow in that pursuit that has guided me ever since when I did decide, you know what, okay, it's time. I really want to get serious about my professional career in the corporate world. One, I avoided sort of waking up in my 40s being like, I didn't follow my passion and having all this regret or resentment or a midlife crisis, number one. Number two, it has taught me so much that I've applied in my own business career, just about the power of creativity, the power of grit, the power of being scrappy, the power of the show must go on. And it's not about perfect. It's just, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Just amazing, amazing learnings from that time in my life that I will always appreciate, and I certainly carry forward.
I like that a lot. You chased the dream, but it really helped shape you up. It didn't come to
Totally,
fruition, but it made you the person you are today.
totally, absolutely.
Joanna, thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed learning from your principles.
Oh, likewise. I appreciate the time as well.